All right, so how are we going to do this? We're going to use a function called as clipping mask. So what clipping mask allows you to do is it will only allow us to change the temperature of the foreground in accordance with the background here or the sky here. So how that will work is you select your top layer, okay, because this layer is the one which has a selection of only the foreground, right? What we're going to do is we're going to go to our adjustment functions. We're going to select the function called as color balance here, which allows us to just change, make things cooler, make things warmer. This is similar to the temperature slider in Lightroom. So what we can do is you can see it's a pretty warm sky and it's a pretty cool foreground. So what we can do is we can add a bit of yellowness and redness to it like this. But right now, what is the problem if I do something like this? It's affecting the entire image. You can see it's also affecting the sky. But we only want this to affect the foreground. So what we can do is, this is where the clipping mask function comes into play. You can right click on this layer, which was our adjustment function layer, and then just click on this option which says create clipping mask. Just see what happens when I click on this. You can see this arrow comes here, which is telling that this function is only applicable to this layer, not to all the layers. Okay, so what happens with this? Can you see? The effect is now only coming on the foreground. Just see. Only it's affecting the layer beneath it. Isn't this fantastic? Now we can easily reference it with the sky and we can decide how much we want. So maybe this was the, let's come back to our default. This was something like the default. I just want to add a bit of warmth here to the foreground, like this. And a bit of reddishness, because the sky is pretty red, you can see. And maybe a bit of magenta, like this, just a tiny bit. And you can see now, this is the effect. Right? I can probably reduce the opacity a bit. And boom, we're done with this. So this was before, it was too cool. Now it kind of matches the look of the sky, right? So this is fantastic. So we're almost done with this edit. It's just one step left, which is correcting those halo-like things in our trees. Now, a lot of people probably won't even do this, but I'm just showing you that if you have to be a perfectionist, we can even get rid of it. Though most people won't be able to see this also. I think if you zoom out, you can see this is looking pretty good and pretty realistic on its own. But we'll still do that because I'm going to teach you about a function which is very, very important, okay, which can really be helpful, which is the clone stamp tool, but a way to use the clone stamp tool, tool in a particular way. Okay, so what we're going to do is, first of all, we're just going to create a new layer and we're going to stamp all these layers together on this layer. That means otherwise using the clone stamps tool can be pretty tricky because you'll have to make sure we're copying and pasting from the right layer. So it's better, since this is the last step before we move on to the Lightroom part, it's better to just do this on a merged layer where all the layers have been pasted or stamped together. So how do you do that? If you've done my Photoshop for Beginners course, Control-Alt-Shift-E. So make sure this new layer is selected, then Control-Alt-Shift-E, or that'll be Command-Option-Shift and E, and boom. You can see that all these layers get stamped over to this new layer. Now we have got nothing to do with these layers. It's a slightly destructive process, but it's okay because this is the last step, okay? Now I'm going to zoom in to that part, the challenging part, okay? And now we're going to use a clone stamp tool to get rid of these things, which even the refine edge tool could not, okay? So usually these are the settings on the clone stamp tool. This will be set to opacity will be 100, flow will be 100, and this is how it is. Now, what is clone stamp tool if you're using it for the first time? Well, clone stamp tool is just basically a tool to copy paste things. For example, if I press Alt or Option with this tool, it turns into this icon here, which means I can copy or source a point now. So I'm telling Photoshop, I click my mouse here, and then if I go anywhere, I can start basically copying and pasting it over something else, right? This is how the normal clone stamp works. So I can go here, I can probably reduce the opacity of the brush so that it has a subtle effect, and then I can copy and paste like this. But this is going to take a lot of time. Why? Because you'll have to be very careful. Let me show you why. Because let's say I do something like this, I copy it here, and then I'm pasting it here, and boom, I start to lose my tree also. I lose that halo thing, but I start to lose the tree also, which is not something we want. Okay, so if you have to do it like this, you'll have to zoom in, go very slowly to those parts, remove them, and that can be done. It's just going to take too much time, so it's going to be very inefficient way of going about things. There's a better way, which is, you can even increase your opacity slightly. but the trick lies in this function called as mode, okay, which allows you to select something called as darker color. And what this allows you to do is, if I copy and if I start pasting, my tree doesn't go away. Okay, see, I'm just gonna select normal. If I copy, if I do something like this, the tree also disappears because it's copying and pasting the entire thing originally. But if I select darker color, what I'm telling Photoshop is I'm copying something from here, and when I paste, only paste it on areas where the parts here are not darker than this. Wherever it is darker, leave it as it is, but if it's lighter than what I've selected, then you can paste it. So paste this darker color here only on areas which are lighter than what I've selected. That's why this is darker color. So it's darkening the areas, but only those areas which are darker or which are lighter than the original selection. For example, if we zoom in more, you'll be able to see this. I'm sourcing my point from this gray area here. Okay. Now, when I start pasting it on these green areas, which are the areas which are lighter and which are the areas that are darker than this? These parts are lighter. So Photoshop will darken them. But these areas, the original tree is darker, so Photoshop won't affect them. So you can see if I source this and I do this, this doesn't get affected, but this does get affected. So this allows us to just work on this in a very fast way. You can see, because I don't have to worry about overrunning things. So I can source something close to it so that you don't get patches. But you can see here how easy this is. I'm going over this, but that is not disappearing, right? You can see here. Boom. So I can afford to, it allows you to make mistakes. You can go over your tree and still nothing will happen. You can see. And even if it adds a bit to it, that's okay. That won't be seen. Okay, the important thing is select darker color and source something close so that you don't, the color is as close as possible to the sky that is near the tree. Okay, so I'm sourcing it right next to the areas. You can see here. Right? I'm not going to be absolutely perfect about this. It's going to take a fair amount of time, but much less time than the normal mode. So you can see we have some of those halo things, but now it'll be bordering on perfection if we try to remove that. Okay. Similarly, we can go over to this part, and to be frank here, almost most of those halos just got disappeared because of the gradient tool that we use. And now, if I come here, if I zoom into that part, even if I see from a pretty zoomed in range, you can see that we just got rid of that thing. And nobody can say that this was artificially created, right? Unless until you really zoom in this much and you're seeing just a bit of that, and that's okay. Nobody's going to do that. Even if you take a printout of this shot, it's not going to affect, right? So we don't want to be perfectionists. We just want to do a tight job, and we've been able to do that. So you can see that was a lot of hard work, but like I said, this was a very challenging edit. This is like an advanced level edit. If you can understand this, if you understood this, and you were able to replicate this, trust me, you can do sky replacement for any image. Now we're just left with one step, which is we're going to save this as a TIFF file, because even I have closed my Lightroom. So I'm just going to, save this. Let's say I can call it edit to TIFF. And I can just save this. And then I can just import this in Lightroom. And then we can just take it over to the develop module and start working the same way. Okay, so I'm going to see you in the Lightroom for the further color grading and local adjustment steps. I hope that you like this. I know it was challenging, but I hope it was fun for you. I'll see you in Lightroom. Bye for now.